Welcome to panel 2. My name is Irwin, the chair and professor from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. We are very, very excited to partner with Esperanza to have this wonderful event. And the topic of this panel is rethinking the delivery, operating, and business models, the curriculum and pedagogy of higher education. So today we have actually 3 distinguished panelists, and they are, in fact, they're all educators. So it's slightly different from the previous panel, which has a little more mix. Here we're all focused on the higher education. Our first panelist is Professor S.C. Cheung, professor from the Education University of Hong Kong. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves a little bit, but I'm going to give you an overall view. So, and second panelist is Professor Justin Reich, and is a professor of Comparative Media Studies and director at the Teaching System Labs, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And third, we have also Professor Gloria Tam, Associate Dean of Professional Learning, Minerva. So maybe we could begin by just Professor S.C. Cheung. Can you maybe give us a brief background of what you do and how you think it's connected to this topic, this panel?
Okay, thank you, Ivan. I'm Professor Cheung from the Education University, and I can share a bit about today's topic about the rethinking the delivery of, can you see the screen? Can you see my sharing?
No.
No?
No.
Let me try again.
Yes, now we do.
You see it? Okay. Is it in the way that I'm expecting the screen is sharing the full screen or just some of it?
Okay, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, today we are talking about the rethinking the delivery, operating, and business models, the curriculum and pedagogies of higher education. So actually what is happening in the very last few months, so from the OECD report, they said that because of the school closure, people are using the physical resources from instructional packages. School children can take it from the school and back to home, and then the parents give the kids about the instructional packages. But most of the time, there are online instructional going on, like real-time lesson or online services for parents and students. And they also consider some self-paced formalized lessons or educational content for exploring. So this is what is happening in the school sector. In the higher education sector, in the past half year, I think most of us are doing online only, live, but sometimes, occasionally, like now in September, we can go back to the university. And it is quite rare that we can go back to face-to-face anyway. It may happen in Hong Kong very soon if it is feasible. So during the past half a year, I think most of the universities, just like the Education University of Hong Kong, the teachers are suddenly switched from face-to-face to live lesson for nearly half a year. So actually, during this period of time, I think a lot of difficulties did happen, and I'll share about that very soon. So, Ivan.
And good. Thank you so much for that opening remark. And maybe we could go to Justine.
Great. My name is Justin Reich. I run a lab at MIT called the Teaching Systems Lab, and we aspire to design, implement, and research the future of teacher learning. My lab dropped most of it was doing starting in March to try to understand the experience of educators in the United States and around the world during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I have a new book that's coming out. It should be available internationally next week called Failure to Disrupt: Why Technology Alone Can't Transform Education, which tries to look back at the sort of extraordinary claims that education technology evangelists have made over the last 2 decades, and why the actual experience of online learning and education technology has largely fallen short of those extraordinary claims.
Very good. We will talk about the technology just in the short moment. Let's have a Gloria. Would you like to share something?
Hi, Gloria Tam here. I'm originally born in Hong Kong, but now based in the United States. I work at Minerva project, and I'm the Associate Dean of Professional Learning there. Just a little bit about Minerva, in case you have not heard about us. We are a San Francisco-based education institution, and our mission is to nurture critical wisdom for the sake of the world. We started out as a university. We also do partnerships with various partners around the world. My role as the Associate Dean there is to work in partnerships with some of the leading learning institutions in the world. So I work with some corporates, for example, General Electric, GE in US, Recruit in Japan. Earlier we have a panelist there who Recruit owns Glassdoor and Indeed.com, some of you may know. We also work with universities like Princeton, UC Berkeley, and here in Hong Kong in Asia, we work with the CUHK to help enable these institutions transform their learning and their education initiatives. Myself, I'm a neuroscientist by training. My PhD is actually in cognitive science. So one of my passions is also to think about how to apply the science of learning, how to apply the hardcore science into learning innovation and making learning interesting and immersive. So that's also one of my passions. Very glad to be here to share my perspectives.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all the panelists. I just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions to any of the panelists, please put your questions in the Q&A section in Zoom so that we will field them and ask our panelists at the end of the, toward the end of the session. Okay, so let's come back. Reimagining education. So this pandemic really caused I think a seismic shift in terms of the way that we view our education. In terms of technology and also changing of the workforce, and also that we're going to have a very different outlook. So can you share something that you see in terms of the challenges and opportunities, okay? Very briefly, in relationship to our topic, how this whole thing will be challenging and also providing the opportunities for us. SC, do you want to start?
Okay. Now, am I sharing now?
Yes, sure. Sharing screen? No, I don't see any screen.
Okay, try again.
Okay.
Because can I do it now?
Yes, yes.
Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in the previous panel, panel one, I think many of them are from different sectors, especially also from the business sector. They have the view that the higher education cannot do everything, or the university education cannot meet what the world is changing, and we have to reimagine the university education. Okay, let us look into these challenges from another perspective. So actually, what we are doing for the university in Hong Kong or around the world, actually there are more than 10,000 universities around the world, and they are really contribute to the changing world. And as you can see from this screen, that there are a number of areas that, according to the UGC data, they said the 8 UGC-funded universities in Hong Kong are doing something that they can do if they consider they are innovative and can contribute to people from Hong Kong to have some job after they graduate. So they are or each university is doing some good things, like the CUHK is doing the bachelor degree of social science in data science and policy studies. And the University of Hong Kong is doing the Bachelor of Arts and Sciences and Applied Artificial Intelligence and so on and so forth. You can just look at the screen that the university actually are not standing there and you have all the traditional disciplines delivery. Actually, every university are striving their best to deliver the degrees that they are applicable and employable, right? So in terms of EdUHK, starting from 2012, we developed the generic intended learning outcomes because of the outcome-based learning. That may not be very desirable, but anyway, we from EdUHK consider problem-solving skill, critical thinking skill, creative thinking skill, all these related skills are core. So we don't just talk about it. We really develop the rubrics for each individual skills. We develop, how long we develop for the rubrics? More than 2 years. More than 20 rounds of going up and down through all the university teaching staff. They comment, they complain, and then you revise and revise. And what are we doing now after so many years? We ask the students to join EdUHK, and those who leave EdUHK after 4 or 5 years of study there. And you can see the bar chart that every journal are increasing, except the global perspective. It's not that appealing, because even though we send every student to go out for half a year around the world to have an exchange program, but it seems doesn't have the global perspective change too much. Okay, in terms of all these journal outcomes, you can see we are developing the generic intended learning outcome of our students, not just the subject discipline. So I think this is the part that I can share up to this point of time.
Okay.
I can leave it for the other colleagues to continue.
Thank you. I really think that computational thinking that will permeate actually through the whole education system. And this is, I think, it's also a trend. But in terms of technology, Justin, would you say something about the challenges and opportunity, because that's your area?
Well, I've been really interested by the number of folks who have created panels or other discussions that have terms like Reimagine, Reimagine higher education, dawn. A lot of folks are big into dawns of online learning and things like that. Because I actually think that we're in the midst of witnessing one of the most extraordinary periods of conservatism in the history of higher education. 1.6 billion K-12 and higher education learners were sent home in March. And if we look at what happened with pedagogy and what happened with technology, I mean, a way to summarize it is that teachers left their lecterns. They went and sat down in front of their home office webcams and mostly kept teaching, as much as they possibly could in the manner that they had done so previously. If you look at the two technology, over the last 20 years, folks have said that massive open online courses, artificial intelligence, adaptive tutors, virtual reality, all these things were going to transform the education landscape. But overwhelmingly, I think across the world, the two most common technologies for learning in the pandemic have been learning management systems, which were theorized in the 60s and 70s and commercialized in the 90s and made open source in 2000s. And a technology that when it was first introduced in the 1930s was called video telephony, which is what we're using right now. So it was not some kind of futuristic disruptive break with the past that we saw, but a scrambling to kind of keep doing things exactly the way we want to, even though there were alternatives that were out there. But I don't see any evidence anywhere in the world that there are large groups of students saying, why on earth do we have to sit through these webcam classes that our teachers who don't know anything about online learning are hacking together? Why can't we use MOOCs? Why can't we use other resources that are out there? It turned out, I think most teachers, most students wanted to keep meeting with their particular microeconomics professor or their particular cognitive science professor. So I actually think the period that we're living through is one of extraordinary consistency. And I think that fits in the history of technology and education, which is when educators get access to new technologies, they use them to extend existing practices. And so, a huge question that opens up, is this a kind of, is this a disaster? Is this a tragedy? Is this a missed opportunity? Or is this evidence that actually the systems that we've built are highly optimized to the set of constraints that they're placed under? And the kinds of things that we're doing right now are actually pretty good and are probably worth iteratively improving over time, but aren't really in need of disruption.
Very interesting. But we still also have AR, VR, so, and also collaborative software that we could interact much better. So there's some still technology I think that we could continue to develop to help education. Gloria, would you have some thoughts on this issue in your specialty?
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, I sit in the intersection of sort of learning innovation technology as well as pedagogy innovation.
Yes.
So that's like what my sweet spot. And Professor Justin Reich raised a really interesting question, like, is technology enabling learning innovation, or have what we have optimized in the last decades or few decades is already working well? I think this pandemic is a very interesting sort of transitioning time, or a time for us to rethink. And as part of Minerva, I exchange ideas with a lot of learning professionals from around the world, from, you know, like institutions like MIT, like Princeton, and Asia, like Korea University, HKU, and we talked a lot about this, right? Technology, pedagogy, what happens now? And I think all around the world, education institutes are rethinking the mode of education heart. And I agree with Justin, like majority, maybe 80% of them are like really just throwing like lectures, like on-campus lectures, into whatever online format they can find, like Zoom, Teams, you know, things like that. But I do believe there is an opportunity of innovation here, and it is happening. So there are professors, there are learning professionals who are thinking deep in how to make virtual online learning immersive and engaging, what kind of science of learning research you can apply. There are professors who are thinking how to better curate asynchronous and synchronous learning to make that combination work. There are professors who are now in the hybrid model. They have to teach both online as well as cater for people who can come on campus and not come on campus, to rethink what the pedagogy should look like. And just give a few examples. At Minerva, for example, we are fortunate enough, we have our own technology, which we started with a team of Silicon-based Valley folks for synchronous online learning. We started it like 5 years ago. So we use video technology platform, but like we also have a lot of features on top of it. So there's some pedagogical things that we can do on online learning, like throw in a poll, right? Like a controversial poll to get people start thinking, throw the students in into breakout to give them peer learning opportunity, bring them back, repoll them so that you re-engage their learning, re-engage their processing system, and then start a Socratic discussion. So this is one of the many techniques, right, that we can use to engage students in learning. I will share one more example. So I talked to one of the US universities, and they're like, oh, we are now starting a new gamified learning challenge for all first-year students. And it's like an economic-based sort of learning challenge. And they make it like the game, I don't know, the Warcraft game, I think it's called Game of Thrones, which is like, they model upon that. And therefore, when you go to the library of that university, you'll see tons of students that are stuck to their computer and device. They're actually like having fun, but they are learning at the same time. It's immersive, it's interactive for them. And that's the kind of, you know, learning innovation. I don't think it's widespread yet, but there's a lot of room to rethink what learning means and how can we make it engaging and at the same time effective.
Thank you. And I will just follow up with the next question. And I want to begin with you, Gloria, because you really have a different business model. So this is about business model. Okay, so after the pandemic, you know, we may foresee a change in terms of the business model, right? Because maybe we cannot do traveling, we have to use technology. And your model actually is putting people in different spatial area in different time, right? How does that change your business model? And I'm gonna ask a, you know, MIT professor and also a education professor. Would that actually impact our business model and make it sustainable for our universities and institution like yours? So
yeah. So our education model is that the students can learn anywhere, and we want like just in the other panel, we want them to have the global exposure. So we actually place the students in 7 countries. So in 4 years, they actually travel again and again every 3 months. They go to San Francisco, and then to London, Munich, South Korea, Heidelberg in India, like Buenos Aires in Latin America, and back to San Francisco. And they can learn anywhere because the professors does not need to be co-located with them, but they are still learning face-to-face, right? They still get that kind of networking, that kind of like attention and warmth and love from the professors, so to speak. I taught a few semesters at Minerva University, and I never met the students. And I feel like I
Wow.
engaged with them so much, right? After just like 26 weeks, I made like the best friends with them. So in a way, it actually takes away that geographic separation, which
Yes.
means a professor from Wharton can be teaching our students in Hong Kong, right? And, you know, like it also gets that, you know, moonlighting strategic psychic, that kind of things that people are talking. You can be working for Wharton at the same time for HKUST, for example. So that expands the education, and not just from the professor side, student side also. So for example, right now, this year, we are opening Minerva education up to anyone who is affected by COVID and wants to spend a year with us, right? They can be in Argentina or they can be in South Africa. So that's the kind of, I think, a newer sort of like no boundary, no geographic boundary sort of business model that we're taking. Yeah.
But without traveling, do you see a business model change? No.
Without traveling, I
I mean,
think it's also, yeah, I
student
think
cannot travel right now, right?
yeah. So our students, still like a majority of them chose to be in a rotation city, so about 80%. But another aspect of it is that without the on-campus like sort of component, the city become your campus. So in terms of the cost, like we don't spend money on library, sports ground, or you know the flowers in the gardens. You know, so we actually save a lot of operating costs, and therefore students can use the city as their learning ground to do a lot of experiential learning. Yeah, so
Very
that
good.
also reduces cost. Yeah.
So Justin, you have a beautiful campus in SC. You know, you both have beautiful campus that you need to keep up. How would the new education really change business model for you, Justin? You're muted. You're muted.
It's part of me. You know, for an institution of science and technology like MIT, I don't anticipate it will change things that much. I mean, I anticipate that that post-pandemic, you know, when if we snapped our fingers and put together a vaccine, our students would rush back to campus as soon as they possibly could. You know, I think there are great things about imagining models of higher education that involve travel and connecting with different places and so forth. There's also something incredibly powerful about making a commitment to a community over an extended period of time. Some of my favorite students work in the electric car club, and they have a machine shop in the basement of an old building in Kendall Square, where, you know, probably the most powerful learning experiences they have at MIT take place working with their peers in that machine shop. And you'd probably find it almost impossible to convince those students to travel overseas for a semester, because they would miss out on what's most powerful to them. So I think, you know, one of the things where everyone is having a different pandemic. There are some folks who are discovering for the first time online and distance learning and saying to themselves, wow, this is great. This is offering me different kinds of flexibility, connecting with people in different parts of the world, letting me organize things around my own schedule. There are also lots and lots of students out there who are experiencing the pandemic and going, Zoom school is terrible. This is much worse than what we've offered before. And I think many of those students are going to be very eager to snap back to what we've offered historically. I think we will see a continued growth in online learning in all different kinds of sectors, particularly sort of like workforce development, second, third professional degrees, those kinds of things, for, you know, working class folks who are trying to work in college with other folks of what they're doing, which is a huge population in the United States. But I think we're going to see that online growth steady and incremental, rather than some kind of substantial sea change. I mean, I think a lot of people are you know, rightly so unhappy with the online learning experiences they're having now, and are pretty excited to get back to what we were able to offer before. Yes,
I agree. We see this scattering effect, right? Everybody's doing some sort of online learning, but very differently, okay? And I think eventually we're going to come back to a model that is probably workable. SC, do you have any comment?
Now, just listen to Gloria and just this big insight are very inspiring, because the two universities that they are working are quite multicultural, and they have a tradition of online learning history because of the previous development of the university, and it is quite different for the Education University of Hong Kong because previously we are trying a lot of effort to promote a kind of development that is not so close to online learning. In general, we are doing the face-to-face for around 90% of the lecture delivery face-to-face. And suddenly in the past half year, we switch from face-to-face to online learning. You can see how difficult and how big the challenges are for the 400 teaching staff of the Education University. So actually what we are doing in the past 2 months in the summertime before we start the new semester now, September, because we want them to be more ready than before. So we have a joint venture with the Baptist University of Hong Kong together to reconsider about the assessment. Because the assessment driven, from the Chinese culture background, you have the goal of a better achievement in your learning. The assessment can have a big influence on the learning and teaching delivery. So we are considering a new mode of alternative assessment because you cannot go back to the university to have campus on-site invigilated assessment. Then you have to do that at home, maybe not so able to be invigilated by the academics. Then the academic integrity become a core because you have behaved yourself and you need more self-directed learning and more self-regulated learning, and then you are being supported in terms of academic integrity, understanding, in terms of the gyro achievement that universities are now grooming. It's not an easy task, but we have started that project. And we are developing alternative assessment that is more related to be as authentic, so that it can be more job-related assessment. So we are doing this kind of, if you said we are redefining education, we are not totally trying to do that at once, but we are starting with the alternative assessment to involve all academics to reconsider what they are delivering.
That's a very good point. And in fact, that's the next question I'm going to ask all three of you. But maybe as you could continue, because I want to just talk a little bit about that. We all know about formative and also summative assessment, right? But now you have really a very distinct education model. Whatever teaching method, the delivery pedagogy that you use, at the end is assessment, whether you acquired a skill or whether you could get a job, and these kind of rubrics or metrics that you could use, right? But even in this online learning, this reimagining education, I think that SC brought it up, alternative assessment method, online learning. How can you prevent cheating? How do you actually use these cameras or biometrics and other things, technologies or ways, alternative assessment ways to ascertain that your method of education has results, right? We don't want to actually try something new and then have no result. So SC, you did talk about the alternative assessment method. Any more thoughts on this particular thing in terms of policy too? So it's not just this to say that we have the technology and assessment, right? What is a policy that needs to be changed in coupling with this new situation that we have?
Ivan, can you ask the host to enable me to share the screen because they disable me to share?
Oh, is that right? Okay, so go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, in terms of assessment, I have just mentioned is about the alternative assessment. So we have to switch from online because of the COVID.
I see. Stop. Yeah. We only see your desktop. We don't see any. We don't see any PPT. We see your desktop, window desktop.
Okay, let me stop it and then switch it first. Okay, let me speak. Okay, let me share. Can you see the screen now?
I see your desktop, but I don't see any PPT.
Let me drop it back. Okay, I think you can see it now.
Okay, yes, yes.
Now, in terms of the alternative assessment, we have a framework to consider because if you want to really change the assessment, it is being in a loop that you are also in the teaching. But in terms of the teaching, when we change the way of assessment, as I have mentioned, we have to consider the support or understanding of academic integrity and how to groom more self-directed learning and self-regulated learning. And because of the gyno is being, we have the rubric, we are now trying to integrating the generic intended learning outcome rubric assessment into every single courses. And that means when one student graduates from the university, it is an accumulation of all the credit, all the courses that the students are having. So in terms of the assessment, if every single course can contribute to the problem-solving skill, creative thinking skill, then when they graduate, they should have a better achievement. Now, if the teaching and learning is focusing on the gyno achievement, then the assessment can focus more on the ability based on the course content. Now, in the first panel, they talk a lot about the development of the ability in terms of creativity, in terms of the need of the future jobs lead. But in terms of the learning and teaching process, it must base on the content that the course that you are delivering, but together you are focusing on the ability of the students' development rather than just the content delivery. This is a kind of changes that make the assessment to be integrated with the learning and teaching process. Then the academic and teaching staff should focus more on the facilitation of higher order thinking, not for deep learning. So Gloria has a very good point that, okay, in terms of online learning, it may not be just looking on the screen, because when you have a mobile phone, actually you can move around, not so constrained in looking at the moon, but instead, when you are encountering or interacting with the other people, you can be in a more comfortable way rather than sitting there looking at the screen and do not have all other physical activities. I think that is not desirable. So this is very inspiring from Gloria's point of view, and from just this point of view of having people from multicultural perspective. So you have the culture of interacting with other people very in a very sophisticated way. But in terms of our students from EdUHK, we have to let them to develop this kind of learning environment, and then they have to adjust what they are doing in the usual practices of learning and teaching. So we want to make changes so that students are being motivated. So I'll talk about motivation is another key issue. The use of technology, it doesn't mean just of the machine learning or the AR. It's not the technology itself. It also, we have to talk about the pedagogy in behind. So
very good.
The point I want to share.
Thank you. Justin, maybe you could share some technology that could help us in terms of assessment. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So one of the challenges with technology and assessment is that our learning technologies are very uneven. They are helpful in some subjects, but not others, for some students, but not others, in some contexts, but not others. So it's, you know, and I think people often underestimate just the extraordinary complexity that falls underneath the rubric of higher education. You know, higher education is trying to teach people, you know, how to saute onions and how to set broken bones and how to argue a case in court, and how to, you know, maintain double bookkeeping and how to read poetry and how to speak a new language. And there's no single set of assessment technologies that address all of those things equally well. To the extent that we want to enable more kinds of self-paced learning or more kinds of algorithmic adaptive learning where, you know, students have some activity, and then in order to keep them motivated, in order to direct them, we want technology systems to give them some feedback. There's some domains in which we can do that pretty well. In domains in which there are very clear right and wrong answers, in quantitative domains, in domains like, certain parts of physics, like electromagnetism, where we can, give students a simulated circuit and know every possible combination and permutation of all the activities that someone could do in that system and say whether it works right or wrong. Probably the domain in which we have the most sophisticated assessment tools is in computer programming, where computer programmers are pretty good at writing computer programs that evaluate the efficacy of other people's computer programs. There are many domains, however, in which we don't have automated technologies that do a good job of evaluating human performance. Writing is probably the most significant one, and in particular, kind of reasoning from evidence. We don't have automated tools that evaluate the degree to which people can make a compelling or persuasive argument from evidence. And that really, across this incredibly diverse higher education that I described, is one of the main things that we teach students how to do. And so I think as we think about things like, in what kinds of ways can technology support new forms of assessment or new assessment practices, we need to really, one, recognize the incredible complex granularity of higher education, and two, recognize that our technologies, I haven't quite found the right metaphor for this, but they're not bulldozers, they're not Swiss Army knives, they don't do it all or knock it all away. They're like very particular pegs which fit in very specifically shaped holes. And there are lots of different of these tiny little holes in higher education.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's almost like a doctor. You don't have just one doctor that fits all. Everybody is slightly different and tailor-made to a particular patient. And it
has consequences, Irwin, for policy too. So let's say we want to move to sort of mastery, competency forms of education. There are some fields in which we can rapidly assess what high quality performance looks like. If you're trying to teach a paramedic how to intubate a patient, any medical expert can tell you whether or not a patient has been successfully intubated or not. Like their chest goes up and down, air passes in and out. We don't have disagreements about that. We have enormous disagreements about what effective pedagogy looks like for elementary school teachers in multicultural classrooms. We don't have a claim that we can say, well, I can just watch that person teach and know from at a glance whether or not the students there are learning effectively, whether students from diverse backgrounds feel included. And so that means that you would have to think about competency-based education, mastery education, differently in training emergency medical technicians than you would in training elementary school teachers.
Agree.
I actually would like to play the devil advocates here. Again, thinking about what is the essence of pedagogy and competency-based sort of education, as well as what technology can do. And if we jump all the way to sort of AI-based grading, right? This is already happening. Of course, those have certain areas of applicability, right? Like you need the model answer, you need the algorithm to train that kind of AI-based sort of assessment. But if we take technology plus learning professionals, right? If we think how technology can enable learning professionals in outcome assessment, I think what Professor Kong said actually really resonates. Like to the core of it is like, do we have the right rubrics to assess, right? Mastery, competency. And just like Professor Kong in his university, Minerva has spent years thinking about the rubrics. And I put in a chat one of the links. If you scroll down, you'll actually see, we call these habits of mind and foundational concepts. So these are things that we want every of our university students to learn, like things like critical thinking, mitigating cognitive biases, understanding fallacy, how do we use game theory to understand behaviors, to the point where how do we use data visualization to be better sort of communicators. So some of these core competencies are very important, and knowing the rubrics and knowing how to use technology to enable that assessment is really interesting. So for example, in a in-person classroom, you will not be able to sort of repeat or relive the lecture, right? In order to say, oh, you've made a really good comment there. But with technology, you are able to capture the whole video. You can pinpoint, bookmark directly that point where there's an excellent debrief of the breakout that I really want to say, Justin, you've done a great job on. identifying biases. Right? That is the kind of technology that I think it may not be groundbreaking, but those are the things that really help some of our professors who are teaching online.
Yeah, very good, Gloria, because I was going to just ask you, how do you actually have the rubrics for critical wisdom? That's what you said, right? Not critical thinking, but critical wisdom. Because that's even at a higher level. So thinking is here, and then critical wisdom.
We are always thinking not just, you know, like some of the skills that we want to teach the students.
Right.
We always thinking about metacognition, right? You need to think, you need to understand what you're thinking, what you're processing, right? Like what are your biases? So these kind of like wisdom, how to get people to be better decision makers, better innovators, you know, better leaders, right? Purpose-driven leadership is something that I think every university student should go through, right? So things like ethics, right? Like that has been shared before. And the other thing about assignment is like, it's not about exams. It's not about grades, right? Like it's also about experiential learning, right? Group projects. When our students, they're all in Berlin, I talked to one of my computer science teachers, and I was asking, what kind of assignment do you give them? How do you grade them? And he's telling me, in one of the lessons, I'm teaching programming and algorithm. I ask the students to take 2 paths they can think of, right? Going from the home to this Berlin palace, right? 2 algorithm, like going through to the different routes and compare and contrast those kind of algorithm. That is the assignment that they give. That is the assignment that they are being graded on, right? So that kind of alternative assessment that Professor Kong was saying, I think resonate with us a lot. Yeah.
Very good. I think it's really a holistic approach, right? It's not only the skill set, but also soft skill, not the hard skill. Right, I know how to do calculus, but if I cannot communicate, so be it, right? Okay, our time is actually winding down. I'm very, very unfortunate. There's so many questions I think that we're going to ask. In fact, I'm going to just ask Justin. We're going to ask you to perhaps you know, have a closure. You know, the reality is that, you know, many colleges and programs have expertise on online education, but still some actually are still learning right now, because this pandemic that brought onto us. Everybody became an online teacher, okay? Not by a choice. Not by choice, by force, right? So what are your final thoughts, okay? To either the teacher, to the administrator, to different stakeholder about this reimagining our education? I think this, again, we are totally reshaping our education, but what are your final thoughts, okay, to close this pedagogy, policy, and technology? Okay.
Yeah, so I think one through line across our conversation has been what are the learning goals that we have? To what extent does the pandemic give us an opportunity to revisit? You know, why are we doing what we're doing? What are the most important things for us to try to teach and communicate? And what are the best ways for us to do that? And I think we need to be very cautious as faculty members and institutions about thinking that folks outside of our communities are going to be able to give us, you know, wholesale answers to those kinds of questions. We don't want to purchase a technology that replaces our pedagogy. We don't want to outsource the core competencies of universities. When universities get better, it's because faculty work with each other in an extended way over time to ask these questions of each other about why are we here? How are we doing what we're doing, and how can we do it better? And I think that sort of collegiality and that commitment to continuous improvement is perhaps the most powerful technology that we have for improving teaching and learning and having our students be more prepared, not just for the labor market, but for their roles in civil society and as reflective, ethical individuals.
Good. Gloria, what do you think?
Sure. I'll just conclude with the quote that I really like. It's from Richard Rohr, one of the American authors. He says, transformation is often more about unlearning than learning. And I heard someone talk about unlearning in the first panel, and that just like sparks my mind. I think we're at this critical stage where it's a lot of unlearning, right? It's about transformation. It's unlearning as learning professionals, right? Like letting go some of our biases, rethinking what we can do in this like a different age with like different environment with this complexity. It's also helping our students and maybe frankly parents to unlearn as well, right? Like sometimes education is not about that one exam. I heard like in the first panel, is not about everything getting right the first time, right? Like for us, like switching to online learning, some of us may fail miserably, even though we have taught like 25 years and the most charismatic, lecturer or professor. When you go online, it may not be the same. So that kind of unlearning process and like understanding, the almost the spirit of design thinking is so important, right? Iteration and sort of learn and getting that feedback loop with the parents, with the students will be really important. And yeah, that's one of my thoughts here.
Very good. Essie, would you like to close us actually?
Yeah, there are a few points that I can summarize about how the online technologies can make changes. Now, one of them is the co-creators of knowledge. Because of the online learning, the teachers and the students have much more opportunities to co-create knowledge together. And because they can share much online. And this is one very key point. Another point, Gloria, as I mentioned, that the video that you have recorded, you can look back at the video for many times. You can track the data. You can make some more points embedded in the video. So this kind of online video format can supplement the original clean materials, a lot, much more and more changes as a multimedia packages. So this kind of a synchronized online learning material is you can do a lot to make students learn much better. And finally, it is because now the online learning can keep track of the students in terms of some data or the trail that they are working with. So we can have a better understanding on the learning style and the learning behavior of the students. But be careful on tracking the students. I hope in the future, it is not a year-long tracking about or many years of tracking the students. That is in terms of privacy. Because students will change accordingly. When we are tracking, it is better in a context because of the in-depth learning context, not keeping along all the data because people will change. So this is a very important mindset when we are trying to understand, because we want to support them and understand that it's because of the in-depth context and not the overwhelming using all these learning data. I think this is what we can learn from this panel discussion.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, as a dilemma for computer scientists, we love to have big data, but then privacy issues as well, security issues as well. So thank you so much. I just think that we have so much more to discuss, but we have very limited time. So I think that we're going to have a break. Is that right, Cora? Rachel?
Yes, I think, why don't we go straight into the final Q&A?
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
A lot of very thought-provoking debates in the
Yes.
last session.
Yes.
So let's actually invite Charleston Sin, Executive Director of MIT Hong Kong Innovation Node, as our final Q&A panel facilitator. And I would also like to take this opportunity if the Secretariat team can send out the survey form during the last 15 minutes or so. If you can also give us your feedback on this panel and what actually you expect us can do more in arousing discussion and also action in this area.